All right, everyone. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Jason Levine, aka Beetlejace, here on Twitch. And it's great to be here on this Monday morning to present to you part 8 of our Audio 101 series. And today, this is actually going to be lesson 1 of 2, because I know myself and I know that I could talk about compression for several days, let alone an hour. So I decided that rather than just run really, really long or try and squeeze everything in, compression limiting will be a two-part, a two-lesson series, parts 8 and 9. So hey, Rulu, how are you? Hey, Vivini, what is up? Hi, Mom, I'm in the stream. That one was almost hard to read. Ihajo, hey, how are you? Finch is here, Magenta X, Dan.io. Alfoot, how are you? Compress it all into one stream. Very good, Finch. Thank you. He's here till Thursday, ladies and gentlemen. Try the veal. Yes. But it needs to be fast. Yes, well, now, and as people are kind of filing in, I want to point out that we are, in fact, talking about dynamics compression. We're not talking about file compression, and we're not talking about time remapping, compressing, squeezing time. This, so, no MP3 talk here. No, optical flow, remapping, squishing frames together. Hey, Boyfruit. So we're actually going to work on, and I'm going to teach you how to understand how to properly set an audio compressor limiter in Audition CC. And this, what I'll show you today, frankly, can be used in any digital audio workstation, any DAW. In fact, I was going to put that in the title, but thought I would just kind of relate it more to Audition, just because I'll plan on using most of its native effects, at least for the beginning. And then we'll go into some third-party ones that you can see here. I brought up just a couple of my everyday faves. So this is our native multiband compressor, which we license from Isotope. So you can see that here. How do I change the length of an audio clip in Audition? Hey, Molten Ink. All right, quick diversion for Molt before we go. Lots of different ways to do that, Molten Ink. Easiest way, best way, is probably to go into Effects, Time and Pitch, Stretch and Pitch, this one here. All right, so just open up a file, any file type, go into Stretch and Pitch. I believe the default algorithm it will use is the Isotope Radius. I probably recommend this one. This is it's newer. We license this from them. It's very good sounding. And then, beyond that, all you need to do is adjust the duration here. So we don't want to adjust pitch, so I'm going to change semitones back to 0. Pitch coherence should be 0. If it's speech or voice, you want to have these boxes checked, preserve speech characteristics, solo instrument or voice. And then you can see up at the top here, we have current duration and new duration. So as we adjust the stretch slider here via percentage, you'll see that now it's 19 seconds versus 14 seconds. Or again, if we were to speed it up, 8 seconds versus 14. So it's all done right here inside of Stretch and Pitch. Oh yeah, absolutely. Any audio file. So yeah, MP3, AIF, WAV, any audio file that you can put into Audition, which is basically all audio file types. Yep. Cool. All right. So are you all ready? Are you ready to learn how to properly set a compressor? Impress your friends with your compression knowledge? Okay. So this is again, this is our multiband compressor, one of my favorites. Use it a lot. Use it largely, actually, quite often for the brick wall limiter. Now, limiting will be in part 2. Part 2 of this two-part series. It's getting very hard. Of this 2-lesson series. But this is one of our native ones. We've got our dynamics processor, the oldest compressor limiter found in Audition, formerly Cool Edit. Very good sounding. Not exactly traditional in its settings. It's got this graph here, which a lot of newer type compressors use. Unfortunately, this is not a great effect for trying to learn or understand how to set compression. So I am not going to focus on this one today. Probably talk about that when we talk a little bit more about presets and things in the next part of this lesson. This one here, the Tube Modeled Compressor. Now, this is the one we're going to feature most today, largely because this is a true traditional compressor with all the standard traditional controls that go back 50, 60 years already in the recording studio. And it's very simple. Basically, you have your input level, you've got your gain reduction meter here on the right, and then 5 settings: threshold, gain, ratio, attack, release. That is all you need for compression. That is all you need to know. Now, understanding all of these parameters can be tricky. So this is what we're going to dive into. This is what we're going to spend the most time on. And I can almost guarantee that when we're done with this, you will know effectively how to set a compressor properly. You'll know when things are compressed. You'll be able to tell visually by looking at a reduction meter, oh, I'm not even using, the compressor's on, but it's not even doing anything. And you'll also be able to identify how things are set incorrectly. All right. So we've got about 54 minutes to get through all of that. And along the way, I'll probably pop open a couple of my other favorites. This happens to be, I've talked about this one a lot on the stream here. This is the SSL Master Bus Compressor, also known as the 2-mix compressor, also known as, in the 80s and 90s, the record maker. And the reason for that is because by putting on this compressor at the end of the signal chain on your master bus, right? So every track is fed through that SSL console. Typically, you would use a ratio of about 2 to 1. You'd put this thing on, you'd use an auto release, you'd set your attack and threshold, boom. Suddenly, your mix sounds like a finished product. All right. So this one is very cool, great metering, very traditional, sounds exactly like the SSL one did. This is provided by Waves. This is a third-party VST3 plugin. Okay. Hello, Ian Livesey. How are you? Hi, Mom. I'm in the stream. Likes that. Impress us, Jace. No, I will compress you, Magenta X. I'm not here to impress. I'm here to teach. Please understand me. I'm not even trying to be. I'm not joking at all. Compression is probably the hardest thing that non-audio users face because it's honestly, it's very difficult to set properly. It's very easy to mess up, and in fact, a lot of pop music that's generated today is done using compression and limiting sort of incorrectly, which can be a sound, but once you really understand how it works, then you can use it to control and fix and really properly make things sound great. Oh, and I'm just teasing with you, Magenta. So I shall try to impress you. All right, so why compression? Well, I made this amazing graphic for you. Why do we use compression? There are 3 simple reasons why we use compression specifically. All right. 1, to control dynamics. Now, we're going to relate this to what I would call 24-bit dynamic range, or assume this is sort of Blu-ray, DVD quality, okay? Versus CD audio, which is 96 decibels, 96 dB of dynamic range. Most of what we do today, when you record an Audition, when you're working in video, when you're doing anything, you're recording in 24-bit. 24-bit depth gives you approximately 140 decibels of dynamic range. And because of that, we're able digitally to capture things when people are talking, when instruments are playing, and you can have all kinds of dynamic peaks all over the place, and you never really have to worry about distortion like you did in the analog days because you have so much dynamic range recording digitally. And remember that when we're talking digitally, when we're working in digital scales, it's a negative logarithmic scale, meaning that the top, the loudest signal you can have on a meter is 0, okay? And then the quietest signal would be minus 140, or you'll often see it in the case of the actual waveform display as like negative infinity, okay? But 0 is the loudest, so we're always going from negative to 0, right? It's a negative logarithmic scale. All right. So the first reason is we use it to control dynamics. And if you just look at the waveform that we have here, and I'll play this for you in a moment. This is from a podcast, and you can see we've got some pretty even looking audio here. There's a couple little peaks and bumps like you'd expect. But then we've got a section here where it just gets very loud. And you can see there's all these little peaks getting in the way. All right. Really just offsetting the median program material, the median loudness of the audio. And then as we go on, you can see it evens out a little bit. A couple more peaks here, a few peaks here, little loud bits here, a peak or two here and there. Okay. So again, what we would often do, especially for a podcast, for a radio broadcast, for any kind of television, is to even out those dynamics, right? You don't want it so all over the place when you're broadcasting it, because often people can lose focus, and this can also lead to distortions and other things. So number 1 reason is to control dynamics. Thank you, Magenta X. Number 2, to thicken or to add punch. Now, this can be in both voice or vocals, right? Particularly in radio broadcast voiceover. You've seen me do it on here today. I mean, I have my typical radio voice, which I'm using right now. And because I speak on mic all the time, I know how to keep my dynamics fairly even and without crazy peaks when I'm doing voiceover. However, I still use compression always, 100% of the time, to just make it thicker, make it a little bigger, make it a little fatter, and maybe perhaps add a little punch. Now, where you really get punch is when we're talking about instruments, right? So think of a snare drum, or a kick drum, or a bass guitar. And when they hit that snare, you really want it to kind of punch you in the face. You should feel the crack of that snare. When you hit a bass note, you really should feel that attack. It should just rumble your whole body. So punch. There used to be an ad by a company called TC Electronics. They're still around. We actually licensed an effect from them, the loudness radar meter. And they had this amazing ad in the mid-90s for a compressor limiter of theirs called the Finalizer. It was a mastering compressor limiter. And the ad simply stated it was 2 words, and it was like big, I'm trying to think, it was like Futura text. And it said, and it was a picture of Rocky Marciano, a very famous boxer, and a picture of his face. It's a very famous, I think it was like Life magazine image, where there's this like fist on his chin, and it's like that, in like not slow motion, but high speed shutter. So you really got to see like, how badly he was being pounded. And the ad simply read, add punch. And any audio engineer who saw that went, I need to get that. And it did. And it virtually changed digital mastering forever, that Finalizer. Okay, so to thicken or to add punch. And then be still your heart. And then the last reason is to homogenize or sort of glue together. And you heard me say just a few moments ago that SSL master compressor it was often referred to as the record maker. You'd put it on, everything would be filtered through this one processor, and suddenly everything just felt glued together. It felt like it was locked. It felt like it was finished, like a finished record, like a finished track. That is often another reason to use compression. So if you have a mixture of things, whether it's audio or video, let's say in a video context, you've got a documentary, so you've got dialogue, you've got music, you've got sound effects and ambient sound. And again, when you're first mixing it, maybe you've got peaks that are all over the place. Drop a compressor on the final stereo mix, not too much, and we'll talk about ratios and things like that a little bit later. And that's a good way to kind of glue everything together. You don't necessarily have to squash everything down, but just to really homogenize and make it seem like one, okay? This is done all the time. You've seen me do it here on the stream with background vocals, right? Got a bunch of and once they're all singing together, you might still have some of those voices getting momentarily louder than others. So you drop a compressor in there, and it just evens it out. It just glues it all together. It just homogenizes the sound so it can sound like one kind of voice, albeit in harmony. All right? Like beer goggles for your ears, right? Right. I guess. Okay, so shall we? Let's kill the music. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is focus on using compression to control dynamics. Okay, this is the number one most common reason why you do this. And again, you can think of any scenario, whether it's voiceover, podcast, reading copy, you're editing or mixing a video for YouTube, right? And you've got voice on it, or you've got music or something. Music, not so much, because music today, there are no dynamics. And I can show you that and prove it visually later if you want to see. So this is used all the time, okay? And the most common use to control dynamics. So this is actually an excerpt from a podcast, one of the only podcasts that I listen to, my actual favorite comedy podcast called The Glendon Guys. And you can find it on iTunes. And again, let me play this back for you and take a quick listen, and you'll see visually what's happening as it's playing back as well. All right, take a look, and here I'll just put on my frequency analysis. I always love to keep that up, as you know. Take a listen. Here we go.
Yeah, I got the tray. Doesn't fit in my car. It's worth nothing to me.
Useless.
Completely useless. I got 2 trays.
It's like
one's
$8.
partially broken. Yeah, it cost $8.
Okay. So you can see they're talking here, right? It's fairly normal. And then one of the guys starts laughing on the left channel. And then that makes the guy on the right channel start laughing. And you've got all these peaks, right, that are basically making this very uneven now. It doesn't sound very balanced, okay? It's dynamic. It sounds very natural. But if I were going to broadcast this, it's a little too dynamic. There's too much variation between the sort of quieter parts and the louder parts. And we want to even those out. We want to control those, to bring them down, to attenuate or to reel them in, as it's often said. Yes, Glendon Guy is a product of the CBR network. As a matter of fact, their producer is in with us today. How are you, CBR? Rose-colored compression. Okay, so let's go up to, now again, I had all these, I added all these compressors on there for you just to show you them visually. We will not use 4 compressors simultaneously. But let's go ahead and add 1, okay? And we'll do it here in the effects rack, which I've got here. I've just got it kind of hidden down below. You can also add compression destructively directly from the effects menu. And as I mentioned, we're going to focus on the tube modeled compressor here. So you can add it from there, or again, if I just pull up the effects rack, you can add it here. And what this allows you to do is kind of play with it a little more freely, stack multiple effects, and then apply them destructively once you get it to your liking. So this is often a better way to do it if you don't feel comfortable just kind of destructively processing right away. So let's do that. So we'll go ahead and add the tube modeled compressor, double click and bring this up. Okay. And I've already got this set for you here. So let me just zero all of this out. All right, 0. Or we can just leave these, that's fine. Okay, so let's talk about the settings of the compressor, okay? And I mentioned I love the tube modeled compressor because this is everything you need to understand compression. You might think, oh, it looks so simple. That's all you need, period, all right? Lots of other compressor effects plugins, whatever, that have all kinds of little tweaky things that you can do to it. Great. That's got nothing to do with setting a traditional compressor. Everything you need to know is right here. And it's based around these 5 settings, as I mentioned. Threshold, gain, ratio, attack, and release. Now, threshold and ratio, like many things, go together. They work in tandem. And you must understand the foundation of one, threshold, to be able to actively set the other, ratio. Okay. So first and foremost, threshold is the point at which compression begins. Now, as I mentioned, we're working in a negative logarithmic scale, okay? Or the plugins part of Adobe. Hey, Sandwich Man. So the VST3 plugins are not any third-party ones. Those are external, purchased. But all of the ones that I'm showing right now, this one included, yes, these are native effects. So I'm showing you this with the native effects here. This is how you can really learn and get started and mimic what I'm doing. So threshold is the point at which compression begins. Your signal must cross the threshold. It must exceed the threshold before compression will happen. Now, having said that, when it exceeds the threshold, how much is it exceeding the threshold by? 2 decibels above the threshold? 3 decibels? 4 decibels? And this is where ratio comes into play. And you've seen this ratio command before, this ratio setting. Often you'll see things like 2:1. And what does that mean? Or 5:1, or 7:1, like we just had it a moment ago. That means that for every 2 dB, for every 2 decibels above that threshold, it's 1 dB at the output, right? So the signal crosses the threshold by 2 decibels. You have the ratio set at 2. It's going to compress that down so that instead of 2 dB above that threshold, the output is 1 dB above that threshold, okay? Now let's say you have it set 2:1 and you go 4 dB above the threshold. Well, with a ratio of 2:1, that would mean that your output is 2. Let's say you exceed 6 decibels above the threshold. With a ratio of 2:1, that means that the output, it's squashing 6 dB down, the output is 3, okay? So these two work in tandem. And the sort of third member of this threes company is the gain reduction meter. And this is why I say I love this effect, because this visually mimics everything that you saw and did in traditional compressors years ago. So this is a really good way to understand. All right, very good, very good. Yes, Jan Eric, many other classical recordings suffer from the same artifacts, absolutely. All right, my 3 is sticky. Okay, all right, so the first thing we need to do is set the actual threshold here. Now, before we do that, let's think about how much we want to squash this down, okay? Now, I'm going to jump a little bit ahead, and then we're going to go back, and you'll see we'll reference this multiple times. Now, there are some standard ratios that you use for everything from voice to snare drum to bass guitar to whatever, all right? Typically for voiceover, and when we're talking in a broadcast kind of context, your ratio, which is, it's a range, okay? You typically will use ratios anywhere from approximately 4 to 1, all right? 4 to 1 to around 8 to 1, or 9, just below 10 to 1, okay? For voiceover, if you think sports commentators, get very excitable, Howie Long, these guys, doing sports. I was watching Women's College World Series last week. Beth Mowins, love Beth Mowins, Jessica Mendoza, Michelle Smith. And there's moments where, as broadcasters, they get excited. So typical broadcast voiceover ratios for anywhere from like 4 or 9 to 1, okay? So we could set this right now 4 to 1. Now, when I look at the waveform, when I actually look at this visually, if I kind of just eyeball where the median peaks are, like the average peaking, where is it happening? It looks like it's happening just at around minus 12 or so. Okay, approximately. I'm just eyeballing it, okay? If we follow the line of minus 12 here, that's kind of like where things are averaging out, that's where they are. And then you've got all these peaks exceeding that. How much are they exceeding that? Well, minus 12, what's the loudest peak here? Well, if we want to do this very quickly, more accurately, we can go to our amplitude statistics. Now, as is often the case, especially with stereo material, your peaks are not necessarily the same on both channels pre-mastering. So we've got a peak at around minus 2.6 on the left and around minus 5. So I said that the median, the average peaks were around minus 12. So if we kind of use the absolute peaks and then the average peaks, that means that we've got about a 7 or so, 7, 8, 9 decibel variance there, all right? Makes sense? Grungy 1965. Doobie Brothers. Did I say something about the Doobie Brothers? So that's telling me, well, I probably want a ratio of approximately 6, 7, 8 to 1, based on how this voiceover was recorded, okay? Now, we could use lower ratios. I could use a 2 to 1, but that just means that I'm going to have to adjust the threshold even more aggressively, which is going to make it sound even more squished down, perhaps artificially, unnecessarily. So we're going to use a higher ratio instead, which is going to allow us to be a little less aggressive with that threshold setting. So let's do that. So we're going to set the ratio here approximately 7 to 1. All right, and again, that means for every 7 decibels that it exceeds the threshold, it's 1 dB at the output, okay? And we're going to start playing this back. So let's go ahead and do that. And you'll see I'm going to start adjusting this threshold slider as we go. And what we want to see is particularly where these peaks are happening. Now, it doesn't have to be the whole time. That's the other essential thing, right? Because this audio is fine. This we're not trying to control. It's this stuff we're trying to control. So the gain reduction will be minimal, if any at all, in this section here. But really, when it gets to here, this is where we should see things happening. And we should see something percolating on that gain reduction meter, even if it's below 7 the whole time. Okay, again, this is how we'll know that we're setting this properly. All right, so let's go ahead and play this back.
Yeah, I got the tray done.
And I'll just start adjusting the threshold slider here. All right, and if you take a look there. Okay.
Useless, completely useless. Right. I got 2 trays.
So again, this is 7 about here.
$8. Yeah, I got the tray. Doesn't fit in my car. It's worth nothing to me.
All right, that's pretty good. Maybe go a little bit more.
Useless.
Let's try around 19 and a half, okay? And I'm going to play this little section over here. Okay. So by looking at this gain reduction meter here, I'm going to start laughing hysterically. We can definitely see that we are exceeding 7 decibels above the threshold. Can we all see that? Oh, okay. All right. I always did 4 to 1 and adjusted aggressively. Okay, Sandwich Man. All right. So we can see that definitely we're compressing. We've got something going on here. All right. So we're a third of the way there. We're not done yet. Because if we just process this now, ultimately, this isn't necessarily going to give us the sound that we want, because while it's squashing down 7 or more decibels, we might have to adjust the gain as well. We also have to play with the attack and the release. Now, before we get to gain, let's talk about attack and release. What does the attack and release mean? Okay, so the attack is how quickly the compressor detects that peak, that signal that we're trying to fix, this, and how quickly the compression kicks in after it exceeds the threshold. Okay? So again, the attack setting determines how quickly the compression kicks in once it has exceeded the threshold. Okay? Now, again, there are lots of standards for attack times. Now, for broadcast audio, and I use sports a lot because this file kind of represents not content-wise, but dynamics-wise. If you've ever watched SportsCenter, believe me, I've had few viewings of SportsCenter myself. Any kind of back and forth, okay, with dialogue, you got stuff all over the map, and when it's live, you tend to want to attack as fast as possible, right? If you leave too much room, little peaks are going to sneak through. Case in point. Now, an average attack for a voiceover like this, believe it or not, is going to be 1 millisecond or below, okay? That is not uncommon, because really we just want to squish everything immediately when those peaks get out of whack, okay? And if we set the threshold and ratio accordingly, we're not going to overdo it. It's going to still sound natural, but those peaks will be just attenuated. They'll be controlled, right? We're controlling the dynamic range to even it out. So that's the attack time. Now, of course, like threshold and ratio, attack and release are like peanut butter and jelly. They go together. You can't have one without the other. So the attack time, you only did that because you never understood ratio. Excellent. Exactly. And that's just it. And that is most people. Sandwich Man, you are not alone there. All right? So the attack time is how quickly the compression kicks in. The release time is how quickly or how long it takes for the compressor to release the squished down signal, right? So you see, if we used my hand, imagine I'm going, ha, 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 ha. So when I say, ha, 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 right? Ha, once it compresses, ha, that release holds it down there. How long does it hold it down there? Well, a typical setting, I think the default even in this compressor, is 100 milliseconds. That's 1/10 of a second. That's pretty legit. Again, if we think about the way that we talk, and most of these attacks, these are called transients, right? They're short. It's not ha, ha. It's not long legato screaming. It's just these momentary ha, 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 ha. And you can imagine they're very staccato and punctuated. This is the kind of stuff we're trying to tame, right? So the release time is how long basically the recovery, how long before the compressor goes back to normal, right? Before it's waiting again for another signal. So for something like this, again, for a voiceover that's going pretty rapidly, right? They're talking pretty quickly. Now, you could also say, if this were a late night jazz broadcast, okay? You're listening to KJZZ 91.3. Phoenix, Arizona, or maybe it's 91.5. I don't remember. I probably just screwed up their station ID. But it's all very, hey, and now a track by Miles Davis, 1959, Kind of Blue. It's all very like this anyway. So it's not going all over the place. There may be moments where it gets, little transient peaks, but we don't need that compressor to release quite as quickly, right? we can keep it down a little bit longer, right? Now, this can also create what's known as a pumping artifact. We'll talk about that probably in lesson 2 because that's a little bit more related to limiting. While I've got your attention on that, because now we've sort of covered all of these settings here. Compressor limiter, do you know why those things are always like PBJ, except actually in the title of this effect, Tube Modeled Compressor. It's technically Tube Modeled Compressor limiter. But if you look at any hardware, it's always side by side, compressor limiter. Do you know why that is? Because they are the same thing. The only thing that determines limiting over compression, the ratio. So, if you're writing this down, ratios below 10 to 1 denote compression. Ratios above 10 to 1 denote limiting. Beyond that, all of the settings and what it does is virtually the same. Now, there's different things that happen when you limit versus compress, but how you set the parameters, and you see how aggressive I'm getting? I'm so into this. How you set them is exactly the same, okay? So compression, ratios below 10 to 1, limiting, ratios above 10 to 1. It's that simple, all right? Cool. Long legato screaming is a different episode. Yes, John Lennon did a whole series on that. All right. Now, I see Sandwich Man's asking about the attack times. Now, I will, on lesson 2 of this, I've started creating it. I didn't finish it this morning. I wanted to get through teaching you how to do it, and then I'll show you some recommended settings for attacks and releases. Typically for things like a snare drum, and we'll do this momentarily, you don't want a super fast attack. The reason for that is you're actually going to hear it clip the actual of the snare, right? And you don't want that. And that was a way back in the day, audibly, if you heard that you were actually getting an audible, like a click, it meant that the compressor was kicking in too soon, and it was actually almost morphing that because you've got this, but that duration is longer than, a tenth of a second. So it would actually mess up that you wouldn't get the whole snare attack. It would kind of sound like, and as you made the attack longer, now if you set the attack too long, then now you've got like this very long snare. And again, if the release was too long, things can go really haywire. So there's different recommended settings for those. To be honest, like most things, especially for instruments, you have to listen as you adjust. There is no just set it and it works. You have to listen because every attack, every hit, every person performing the instrument in question or voice or vocal is going to do it a little bit differently. Even if we said the same thing, played the same note, beat, whatever, I'll play it differently than you. So these have to be set, sort of in real time whilst listening. But there are definitely some guidelines and areas where you want to be. And I would say, for the most part, unless now there's reasons where you might use an attack of 1 millisecond on a snare drum. But for most cases where you're just trying to, again, what's number 2? We're not just trying to control dynamics, we're trying to add punch. A 1 millisecond attack is not going to give you a punchy snare. It's going to give you a sort of non-dynamic, very flattened out snare drum, which can be cool. But not if you're really trying to, crack someone over the head with a stick. Which, you know what I'm saying. Okay, so now that we've got this set, let's see what would happen if now they're not speaking too quickly. All right. So let's see what happens if we used an attack of say 9.9 milliseconds. This is pretty common for voiceover. Again, maybe for a little bit more, less aggressive, not with so much laughter kind of thing, but this can usually do the trick. Now the release at a tenth of a second, because of the laughter and everything, I'm going to make this a little bit faster. So let's set the release to around minus 50, give or take, okay? We preview that again. Take a look, okay.
Useless. Completely useless.
Okay, now I told you we're going to get to the gain setting in a second here. So let's just go ahead and apply this. All right, let me go up to my effects rack. I'm going to apply the compressor. And let's see what happened. Okay, so when we take a look on the surface, all right. No, the stream just won't load. Sorry. When we take a look here, now you can definitely see that most of the peaks were tamed. There's a few that still kind of snuck through. Now, if they snuck through, what does that tell us? He says to a silent stream. The stream seems to be offline on PC and Mac. Can someone confirm that before I move forward? It looks like we're streaming on... I'm watching it on my iPad. So, okay, yeah, Crisis is seeing it. Hey, Crisis, how are you? All right, so I'm going to keep going. So the attack time will help us fix that. Possibly the threshold as well, right? Right, because that one, that's not as hot as some of the others, so maybe we weren't hitting it hard enough. So we need to adjust that threshold just a little bit more so that it's picking up a few more of those kind of smaller, but nonetheless kind of out of range peaks. All right, and then overall, everything seems quieter. If we just take a look here, and then redo here, everything's a little bit quieter. That's because we didn't adjust the gain setting. So now let's talk about that, and let's really bring this back into just really kind of evening out these dynamics, okay? Very good, Crisis Around. Very nice to see you. The attack was too slow. Exactly. Alfoot. Exactly. Femme Ivoire. Very nice to see you. Okay. Attacks and stuff while I'm fighting dinos and... Okay. All right. So let's go back to the Tube Modeled Compressor. Whoops. I didn't want to do that. Go back to the Tube Modeled Compressor. Ooh. Very white face. And let's look at what we have here. Okay. Oh, whoops. It's funny. It's pulling up my setting from before. Well, this is what I was ultimately going to set it to, approximately anyway. All right. So we had the gain set at 0. Okay, now it's where it was a moment ago. So strange. We have the gain set at 0. So when you use gain for a compressor, there's two reasons to use the gain. First of all, when you are adjusting the threshold, okay, I told you have to listen, because part of what you're listening for, if you want to know again that your compressor is set properly, we know now that when we see gain reduction exceeding that ratio number, we know that we're compressing, okay? But how do we know if we've compressed it properly? Is it too much compression? Is it too little? The way that you can tell is when you take the effect off or on, the gain, or I should say the volume, let's just use volume here. The volume should be approximately the same, okay? Because again, we're just trying to tame, to control those peaks. So when they're talking normally and when they're laughing, the only thing we're trying to do is squish down some of the laughter. Everything else should be the same. And as a result, overall, everything should be the same, okay? So if you're setting the compressor and when you turn it on or off, it gets quieter when you kick it in, when you turn it on, that's called makeup gain. You're going to make up what you lost by squishing things down, okay? So let's do that. So let's take a quick listen here. And I'm probably going to need, it sounded about 5 dB or so. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, I got the tray. Doesn't fit in my car. It's worth nothing.
So there's before, after. Let's kick it back in.
Yeah, I got the tray. Doesn't fit in my car. It's worth nothing.
Bring this to around 5.
Yeah, I got the tray. Doesn't fit in my car. It's worth nothing to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a little bit hotter. I'm gonna keep it at 5. I'll do like 5.5. Now I added a little bit of extra gain. The reason for that is thickening and a little bit of punch, right? A little bit more presence. So if you just want it totally even, you should have it so that the volume is identical whether this is in or out, which seemed to be at around 4 or so.
I got the tray. Doesn't fit in my car. It's worth nothing to me.
I'll even back it off just a little bit. All right.
Yeah, I got the tray. Doesn't fit in my car. It's worth nothing to me.
Okay. But I'm just going to give it a little bit extra boost, which is just going to make it a little bit more present. Okay. Now it's not uncommon, particularly with snare drums, electric guitars, that you're not making up gain. You might even be attenuating a little bit. You might be dropping the gain down to bring it down even further, right? So here,
yeah, I got the tray.
After, before.
Yeah, I got the tray. Doesn't fit in my car. It's worth nothing to me.
After, okay, you can hear that it's a little bit quieter. It might be a little bit difficult to hear over the stream. I've got all these fans and things going on. So that's not uncommon to also drop the gain right? To actually bring everything down, to make it actually attenuate it, to be a little quieter while taming the dynamics, okay? That's a good practice if your instrument was recorded very hot, okay? Let's say that your snare drum was peaking at -3, okay, like the average peak. So you want to kind of give everything that -3, but really you just kind of want to also bring everything down, because -3 before you master and finish the mix, it's a bit hot. You're not giving yourself a lot of headroom overall for a drum kit. So it's not a bad idea to attenuate, to bring down. But for this, we're just going to add a little bit of gain. Now, we talked about that attack. At 10 milliseconds approximately, we weren't catching all those peaks. So we're actually going to take this all the way down based on, again, the sort of rapid chatter that's going on here and how quickly these peaks are happening, to a 0.1 milliseconds. And the release, we're going to leave it at around 51. And then I'm just going to increase the threshold a little bit more here to around -23 or so, just a couple more dB.
Yeah, I got the tray, doesn't fit in my car, it's worth nothing to me.
Okay, so here's before.
Yeah, I got the tray, doesn't fit in my car,
After.
it's worth nothing to me.
Okay, now you might be saying to yourself, I don't hear any difference. It sounds exactly the same. Again, without overdoing the gain, the makeup gain, it should sound basically the same, albeit with those peaks squished down. So now, when I apply this, and let's go ahead and apply it to everything. So I will remove my selection. Let's apply it. Voila, right? And now, everything is very even. All of the peaks are even. And when we play it back,
Yeah, I got the tray, doesn't fit in my car, it's worth nothing to me.
okay? And because this is all very even, now when I do a global volume adjustment here, you'll see that the audio just overall looks much healthier, right? Before it was very kind of thin, erratic with these little peaks all over the place. Now this looks healthy, this looks right. And we've got stereo vocals going on either side, so they're not going to be the same. Here, take a listen a little bit louder, a little bit more present.
Yeah, I got the tray, doesn't fit in my car, it's worth nothing to me.
Useless.
Completely useless.
It's even, it's present, it's loud, and it doesn't sound like anything was compressed or attenuated. It just sounds normal. You just passed audio engineering school. Okay? If you can do that, you know how to set a compressor. Now, let me talk about something else here. Talk about normalizing. This is a good period to talk about normalizing. All right. So you can see now, do you remember there was about a 3 decibel difference between the left and right channels? So right now you can see it's less than 0.3 dB difference between the two. Again, we just did our job. We just rocked it, okay? We did a good job here. It's even. It's evened out, and it's still dynamic, but it's just uniform and even and nice and present. Perfect. So our peak here is -1.5. And because the audio is very even, we were able to bring up everything like that, and it really sounds very nice. Okay? They're laughing, they agree. All right, if we go back to the original, let's undo amplify and undo compression. And let's run amplitude statistics on the original again. Okay, so again, here's the original peaks. Now, if I wanted to bring this to -1.5, where we heard it a moment ago, -1.5, okay, it can only adjust everything by about 1.1 dB because the loudest peak is -2.6. So we just increased everything by a decibel. Guess what? You're not even going to hear the difference. Your ears and your brain, they don't perceive a change in audio in decibels that's less than 1.5 dB. So a common mistake, people try and normalize something like this, and they're like, okay, I just made it all louder.
Yeah, I got the tray, doesn't fit in my car, it's worth nothing to me.
It didn't really do anything, right? So if we were to, let's undo the normalize. I wonder if I can go back to adding all these things. I'll just have to do it manually. Okay, so let's go back here. We've got our Tube Modeled Compressor enabled, just making sure it's all back. Let's go ahead and reapply this, and let's do the same thing here. We'll normalize to -1.5. Take a listen again.
Yeah, I got the tray, doesn't fit in my car, it's worth nothing to me.
It's noticeably louder, more present. It's what you want, all right? You love this. Excellent. That laugh gets annoying. Sorry, Crisis. That's the way it is. Yep, big difference. That's amazing. All good. All right? Sweet. So that's it, okay? Simple, easy to use, tube modeled compressor. If you're in doubt, when you're in doubt, this is the place to start. Threshold and ratio, like PBJ. Attack and release, like PBJ. Gain reduction meter, gain, makeup gain, output gain. These two things, right? Really nice, really good sounding. Now you know how to do it. So that's for voice. Now let's take a moment here. Sounds clearer, impressive. Thank you, Crisis. And let's head over to the multitrack. Now again, the same technique I just showed you can be applied to anything. I'm just going to show you two more examples here on snare drum, and maybe bass guitar, to talk a little bit more about, again, adjusting those attack times. The technique is the same, it's just how different attacks and releases can affect a sound. So this is the master multitrack for one of my songs called Toot Toot Monster, available on my most recent EP, Just Play Piano, Vocal, and Drums, available now on Spotify. And take a listen to, I have the drum tracks soloed. There are no effects on the drums. It looks like there's a little bit of reverb, a little bit of room reverb on the snare. Otherwise, no effects here on the multitrack. Let's take a quick listen to this. Okay, so no compression or anything applied to these drums. It's also pretty quiet here. Oh, my master's at -6. Okay. It's a drum kit. Okay. It is what it is. So, and you can see that it just kind of sounds flat, right? So remember, control dynamics, add punch, homogenize, level, glue together. This is the other kind of thing that we typically want to do with compression. And drums, always. You want to use compression. Pretty much, you'll probably use a compressor on every drum itself. And then, typically, you'll often use some kind of compression and or limiting and or ceiling limiting on the overall kit to really make it kick you in the face. All right? If that's the sound you're going for, which for any kind of rock, dance, pop, ambient, industrial, in your face. So let's do the same thing again. Let's go ahead and add our tube modeled compressor here. And let's just solo the snare drum. In fact, I'm going to take the mixer, I'm going to dock it over to the side so I can see what we're doing here while we're adjusting this, okay? So we're going to take a listen. Just the snare drum. Oh, and while we're in here, I just want to talk about presets for a second. I don't know if we actually have any snare presets in this. We've got one called More Punch. Maybe we try that first. We'll start with that. When you use any compression preset, all right, and this goes for any effect, native effects in Audition, third-party VSTs from Waves, you're working with compressors and Pro Tools, doesn't matter where, you choose a preset, 90% of the time, you need to adjust really only one setting to achieve the sound that the preset is trying to give you. And who can guess what setting that is? You only have to adjust one setting to ultimately hear what they're trying to go for in that preset. Who knows? Dun, 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 boom, boom. Anybody? Assoc Dog, CBR, volley motion, buffering endlessly. Okay, that's not coming from me. Good day. Anybody know? Last chance. Threshold. All foot. You win. Yes, the threshold, right? The point at which compression begins. So now, as it turns out, this -22 right here is a pretty aggressive threshold setting. How do I know that? Just by looking at it? Well, look at the waveform. Remember what we were just talking about seconds ago? Where if the snare is recorded very hot, which this one is, look, it's actually peaking. It looks like it's peaking just below a dB, right? And we can run amplitude statistics, our best friend, and sure enough, just by looking, the peak is at minus 0.11. So if we set the threshold to minus 22, this thing is exceeding the threat. I mean, look at it. All these peaks, every single one of them goes above minus 4. So we're very aggressively setting this. Now that's okay, but that's probably not what we want to do, all right? So that's why I say you always need to adjust these thresholds. Now, similarly, when I'm talking about this kind of punch, aggressive, notice something else here. We won't wind up using this one because I was looking at the ratio. You see the ratio here, 18.9 to 1? So what does that tell us? It tells us that we're limiting, right? We're really trying to squish to add punch. Now, the truth is, limiting punch is better for sort of the overall kit, all right? If you just want the attack of the snare to really cut through, you do not want to use a ratio of 18.9. You just don't. It's not an opinion. It's just a fact, because when you're limiting beyond 10 to 1 on the snare, it's gonna be just a little it's just not gonna have the attack, the crack that you want. It might be very snappy, pumpy. I don't know. I guess the music kind of depends, really. I guess there's, again, so many things are used for stylistic purposes now. I shouldn't have even said that. That was stupid. It just really depends. But ultimately, if you're just trying to improve the pa, pa of the snare, and I've said this many times, I don't hit the snare very, very hard. I play dynamically and kind of soft. They recorded this nice and hot because my dynamics are fairly freaking even, as you can see here, right? Normally in the studio, I wouldn't record a snare drum with only less than a dB of headroom, but they could tell, well, this guy's pretty even. So it was done pretty hot, all right? But having said that, if you just listen to it, I really want it to be like, you know, I want it to hit me in the face, and this isn't hitting me in the face. This is kind of like a fizzle, you know? All right, it's just kind of flat. So we want to pump that up, not to be confused with pumping it with a limiter, all right? So let's go ahead and set our threshold back to 0, set our gain back to 0. 0. Set our ratio. Now this is a snare drum. Typically for a snare drum, again, these will vary, and based on the dynamics of how I'm playing this, anywhere from 3 to 1, 5 to 1. Again, if you're really looking to squash a little bit more and make it even more punchy, you can get to approach 10 to 1, you know, 8 to 1, 9 to 1. I'm going to say that for this, probably 5 to 1 is all we need here to give me the kind of sound I want. Make it a little bit punchier, fatten it, thicken it up a little bit, and just make it a little bit more present. So again, we're going to start adjusting the threshold. We're going to leave the gain at 0. Now, before I do that, again, we have to think about the attack time, right? Now, as I told you, if I set this to, let's set it to where we had it for the voiceover, right? 0.1 milliseconds. And this release is at 3,000 milliseconds. It's a 3-second release time. That means that when I do that first hit, it's just squashing everything down. It's not releasing that compressor. That's not good at all. That's going to give us a lifeless sounding snare, okay? So we want the release, this is not a fast song, so we can make the release a little bit longer so that we kind of preserve all that fatness, right? The longer the release time, again, it's going to hold that sound. It's going to hold it down. So it can create some nice natural thickening, fattening. Let's just do 100. And we might make this a little bit faster, okay? So ratio 5 to 1, attack of 0.1. We will change this. I want you to hear what a 0.1 millisecond attack sounds like on a snare, and a release of 100. In fact, I'll even increase this to 250 just to kind of over-accentuate what this is going to do. Let's play this back and take a listen. All right. So remember, the gain reduction meter, we've got to see that exceed 5 decibels on here. And here, what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to just bring this up so you can hear it a little bit better. Okay. Now, as I adjust this attack time, now you might be thinking, that sounds okay. It's actually clipping, though, the actual drum hit. So watch what happens as I make this longer. And where we want to be typically is around above 10. Kind of like a fuzz. But as we increase this, you can really hear it pop, right? You can really hear it just kicking in, all right? And if we increase that release, you can actually see it on the meters, how it's kind of doing this kind of thing here, right? So the release is too long. So we want a faster release. Let's go to around 75. And let's try around 18 on this. Now, as I mentioned before, it's kind of clipping the track here a little bit, so we might even decrease the gain just a little, which is actually just going to make it sound even punchier. Before, now it's louder now, but it's just kind of, right? And again, I brought the volume up so you can hear it better, and here's after. Right? Now, if we wanted to kind of match the volume, this was at minus 2.4 before. That's the actual level that it should be at for the whole drum kit. If we wanted to kind of match those, again, to kind of make sure that they're the same in or out. So here's without. Really lifeless, right? Here's with. And I'm going to just mute my vocal mic real quickly because this is so quiet so that you can really hear what this is doing set properly. All right, take a listen. First, we'll do it without compression and then I'll turn it on. All right. A little bit easier to hear that way. Okay. So again, now with the snare drum setting, we have an attack of around 16 milliseconds, a release of around 82 to 100. Again, I would probably tweak that a little bit more once I was listening a bit more pronounced in the context of the whole kit. But using the same techniques, using the same, looking at the reduction meter, looking at the same ratio, right? And I'd probably drop the ratio a little to give it a little bit more of an aggressive attack sound, which you can do for snare drum. It makes sense, right? Especially in the context of kind of a heavy rock song. You want it to really punctuate. That's the best way to do it, okay? So, we're at the top of the hour. I think this is a good place to stop. How did you find this today? Aztalk Dog. Yeah, awesome. Nice. So again, why do we use compression? To control dynamics, to thicken and add punch, to homogenize and glue together, all right? And that was the last thing I was just going to show you. We can do it in the last minute here. Let me go into my folder here. All right. Now, this is a mixed file, but it is not it's not a mastered file. I'm just going to attenuate the whole thing here because it's mixed a bit hot. Let's bring it down to around -3. All right, and I played this on stream before. This is a song of mine. You only saw half, but it's still great. Thank you, Crisis. So what does the release do? Okay, last time, as I mentioned, so the release after it attacks, the attack is how quickly the compression kicks in. The release is how soon after the compression kicks in, it releases the signal back to where it was, okay? So it compresses, it squishes it down, and then it has to release that compressed signal, right? So the release is how soon after compression it lets go, okay? So take a listen to this, just a second of it. Okay. Now it sounds pretty good. It's a balanced mix. It's a good sounding mix, but I just want to glue it together a little bit more. Just make it a little bit more something. So for this, I'm just going to show you very quickly, again, using my classic favorite, the Record Maker, the SSL Master 2 Mix compressor. Okay. And let's go ahead and let's put threshold all the way. We'll do 2 to 1. Let's keep the attack here. This is 1 millisecond. Let's probably go to let's start at 3, and then we're going to use an auto release time. Now, a lot of your hardware compressor limiters have an auto release. That means that it automatically figures out Crisis, or who asked that? Yes. Yes. It automatically figures out how soon after it compresses to let it go, right? And part of, by the way, here's a good tip. When you're mixing dance music, if you're doing any kind of like dance, anything with a serious beat, so dance, trance, ambient, any kind of hip hop, a common thing with the release is you release it against the beat of the drum, right? And that's, again, you can create pumping sounds, or you can kind of just time it so that the compressor lasts as long as each hit does, and that really thickens and glues everything together. And a really good auto release like this SSL one, it just knows what to do. That's why they called it the Record Maker, because you would just turn this thing on and suddenly it was like, after you set the threshold and makeup gain, of course. So let's do that. So we're going to increase it a little bit more. Now we can peak it around 4, right? This is our gain reduction here. We've got a 2 to 1 ratio, so that means for every 4 dB above the output, above the threshold, it's 2 dB at the output. All right. That attack sounds good. Looks like we can give it a little bit of makeup gain. A little bit more. Okay, so here's before, here's after. And notice we're not peaking, we're just evening out, gluing together. Before, after. Everything just sounds really present, right? And we can even give it a little bit more makeup gain even. Without. Right? Okay, and you can perform the same thing, of course, with the tube model compressor. Now, the one thing it doesn't have an auto circuit. All right, so unfortunately, but you get the idea. Okay, and the same process: setting the threshold, setting the attack, setting the ratio, setting the makeup gain, watching the gain reduction, all applies. All right. Hey, Lazy Rick. All right, everyone. So thank you for joining me for part 8. Lesson 1 of 2 on how to use a compressor in Adobe Audition CC or any digital audio workstation, whether it's Pro Tools, whether it's Nuendo or Premiere Pro or anywhere where compressors are used or implemented. We're going to just stop the stream and we're going to continue working on video in Premiere Pro. I'm going to be editing and going through more of my stock selections and show you some of the ones that the final versions of the ones that we uploaded or I uploaded. And so far, a couple of the ones that they've already accepted, which is very cool. So thank you so much for joining me. We'll be back on Friday. Now, I haven't decided what I'm going to do Friday. I think Friday could actually be a live performance day. I'm feeling like I need to do some live piano. So we'll see how that goes. In any case, please stick around. Now, you may need to refresh your browser, refresh your app. Thank you again for watching. I am Beetlejace. Please follow me here, twitch.tv/Beetlejace, for more video, more audio, more supreme audio nerdery, and motion graphics and other things. And I will be right back. So don't leave. Don't go away. Stop the stream. Restart it. See you in 2 and 2. Okay, here we go. Ciao.